Have you ever struggled to say no, even when every part of you knew that you needed to? Maybe you've worried that setting boundaries would make you selfish, unloving, unforgiving. Or maybe you've spent so much of your life taking care of everyone else that you've forgotten your own needs matter too. If that's you, I want you to know you're not alone. And more importantly, I don't believe that's God's heart for you. Because boundaries aren't about pushing people away. They're about faithfully stewarding your peace, your purpose, and the person God designed you to be. One of the biggest misconceptions about boundaries is that they're about controlling other people. They're not. Healthy boundaries are about taking responsibility for yourself while also allowing others to take responsibility for themselves. They're an expression of wisdom, of self-control, of love. Proverbs 25:28 says, "A person without self-control is like a city with broken down walls." In biblical times, city walls weren't built to keep people away. They protected what was valuable inside. Without those walls, the city became vulnerable to attack. Our lives work very much the same way. Without healthy boundaries, our peace, our energy, our relationships, and even our sense of identity can become vulnerable too. Jesus modeled healthy boundaries throughout his ministry. He loved people very deeply and he served sacrificially. But at the same time, he regularly withdrew from the crowds to spend time alone with the Father. He didn't meet every single expectation placed upon him. He wasn't driven by pressure. He was led by purpose. Jesus understood something that many of us are still learning. Saying no to one thing allows us to say yes to what God is actually calling us to do. For many women, though, boundaries don't simply feel difficult, they feel unsafe, especially if you've experienced relational trauma. When your nervous system has learned that keeping other people happy is what keeps you emotionally or physically safe, people pleasing becomes a survival strategy. You may find yourself constantly managing other people's emotions, avoiding conflict, over explaining, or feeling responsible for everyone's happiness. Over time, you stop asking, "What do I need?" and you begin asking, "What will keep everyone else okay?" That's often where enmeshment begins, not because you lack love, but because somewhere along the way, survival taught you to disconnect from yourself. One of the beautiful things that healing does is restore your God-given autonomy and agency. Autonomy is your freedom to choose, and agency is your ability to act on those choices. Trauma often disconnects us from both, but healing gently reconnects us with them. As your nervous system begins to experience safety, your ability to recognize where boundaries are needed becomes more clear, and your ability to lovingly hold those boundaries becomes stronger. I also want to share something that completely changed how I view boundaries. They're not simply about saying no. Every boundary is actually two choices. When you say no to something unhealthy, you're actually saying yes to something life-giving. Here's an example. When you say no to disrespect, you're saying yes to dignity. When you say no to chaos, you're saying yes to peace. When you're saying no to overcommitting, you're saying yes to rest. When you say no to self-abandonment, you're saying yes to becoming the woman that God created you to be. Boundaries aren't removing good from your life. They're protecting what matters most. So, what does establishing a healthy boundary actually look like? I like to think of it as 6 simple steps. The first one is to identify what feels wrong. Pay attention to the moments, experiences that leave you feeling anxious, resentful, exhausted, unsafe, or unseen. Those feelings usually reveal where a boundary may be needed. Next, you're going to interpret why it hurts. Ask yourself, what is this experience touching inside of me? Sometimes it's exposing an old wound. Sometimes it's revealing a need that's gone unmet. Then you're going to evaluate it through God's truth. Ask, does this relationship, this conversation, or this situation honor the values, limits, and dignity God calls me to protect? If not, a boundary may be needed. Then it's time to define your boundary. You want to keep it simple. An if then statement usually works well here. If this continues, then this is how I'll respond. After that, it's time to explain your boundary with kindness and clarity, but you want to avoid over explaining. You don't need to convince someone that your boundary is valid. You simply need to communicate it respectfully. And then finally, it's time to enforce it. This, of course, is the hardest part, but boundaries without follow through aren't really boundaries, they're just wishes. Enforcing a boundary isn't punishment. It isn't controlling someone else. It's simply honoring what you've already decided is necessary for your well being. So, what does this actually look like in real life? Let's say that you've identified being yelled at during a conflict leaves you feeling unsafe, disrespected, and emotionally flooded. Through some self attunement, you recognize that this experience does not align with your God given right to be treated with dignity and respect. A healthy boundary might sound something like this: if you start yelling at me during a conversation, then I'm going to step away to give both of us time to regulate before we continue this conversation. Notice that the boundary isn't, you're not allowed to yell, because you can't control another person's choices, can't control their emotions or their behaviors. The boundary is what you will do to honor your own values, needs, and limits. You are taking responsibility for yourself while allowing the other person to be responsible for themselves. But for someone who has spent years feeling responsible for other people's emotions or trying to maintain peace at the expense of themselves, this can often feel incredibly uncomfortable. But every time you honor a healthy boundary, you are teaching your nervous system a new truth. I am worthy of safety. I am worthy of respect. I am allowed to care for the person God created me to be. The beautiful thing is, these same principles apply to the relationship you have with yourself. Some of the most important boundaries that you'll ever establish aren't with other people. They're with your own habits, your own schedule, your own priorities. Choosing to get enough sleep, limiting social media, protecting your quiet time with God, making space to regulate your nervous system, choosing healing instead of old coping patterns. Those are all boundaries too. And every time you honor them, you're teaching your body and your soul something incredibly important. I matter. Not because of what I do, not because of what I produce, but because I am an image bearer of God. If boundaries feel difficult, it doesn't mean you're failing. It may simply mean that your nervous system is still learning what safety feels like. Healing isn't just changing behaviors, it's allowing your body, soul, and spirit to fully embrace the truth that you are already worthy of love, peace, dignity, and protection. Because trauma may have taught you to abandon yourself, but it never had the authority to redefine your value. If this message is resonating with you and you're realizing that setting boundaries feels far more difficult than simply learning to say no, if you recognize that people pleasing, over explaining, fear of disappointing others, or difficulty protecting your peace may actually be rooted in unresolved trauma, I want to invite you to explore Victorious. Victorious is my 3-phase, faith-based, holistic healing journey designed to help women heal body, soul, and spirit. Inside, we don't just talk about boundaries as relationship skills. We explore why your nervous system may resist them in the first place. You'll learn how trauma impacts your sense of autonomy, agency, and self-worth. How to recognize the survival patterns that keep you stuck, and how to establish and maintain healthy biblical boundaries from a place of peace instead of fear. Because lasting boundaries aren't built through willpower. They're built as healing restores your identity. Your nervous system begins to experience safety, and you fully embrace the truth that your life, your peace, and your God-given calling are worth protecting. Healing isn't about protecting yourself from people. It's about faithfully stewarding the person that God designed you to be from the very beginning. And healthy boundaries become one of the beautiful fruits of living out that truth. If you'd like to continue this journey with me on YouTube, I hope you'll join me in the next video where we'll talk about one of the most powerful and even misunderstood aspects of healing and transformation: forgiveness. We'll explore what forgiveness is, what it isn't, and how biblical forgiveness brings freedom without asking you to ignore wisdom or abandon healthy boundaries. Until next time, keep moving toward healing, wholeness, freedom, and the victory that's yours through Jesus.